So, yesterday when we were talking about the Tantric Tarot Game, and I want to talk about this beautiful setting that we have for it, and the circle of cards, which I think is a huge part of really understanding how the Tantric Tarot Game works. But we were talking about the High Priestess, and we were talking about intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So what does that, practically speaking, what is the significance of intuition coming after will?
Yeah, so, what we were talking about with will was intent, right? So, right here, let's just think of the elements of the Tantric Tarot Game that exist right now. We have all of the major cards, all of these 22 adventure destinations in the cosmos. And we've decided to put the Fool in the center, because the Fool is part of every experience of the Tantric Tarot Game. Because the Fool is that being that experiences things as in the moment and real and fresh, and the intensity and the openness and the aliveness of experiencing something directly. And so we've decided to use the Fool as sort of our compass pointer. So the Fool, we could just focus on the Fool and just center ourselves by just being open to the breath and the pranic energy and that state of shunya where nothing is happening and everything is possible. That sort of sense of the void at the beginning before the Big Bang happened, when nothing existed, and then all of a sudden, out of that complete nothingness, everything sprang into life. And that's what the magician is. So we want to point our Fool towards the magician. The magician is that sense where you say, so one of the yogic ideas of intent is that intent comes from a word. It becomes from, when he talks about the mantra Om or the mantra Ong. In Kundalini Yoga, we say that the universe, the cosmos, the entirety of everything out of the void was created by a sound, and it was a word. And, of course they say this in the Christian Gospels, right? In the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God. And so the idea in yoga was that God was sort of like, he was completely formless, but he somehow turned himself into like some kind of ability to speak, to utter a sound, and the sound he uttered was Ong, and out of that sound everything in the creation existed. So the magician is sort of that transition between that formlessness, that shunya of the Fool, to things are happening, and particular things are happening. But another piece of intent and another piece of the magician is what they call the magician's choice, which is the magician has to choose. You can't experience everything all at once. If you were doing that, you would sort of be back in that Fool state where, everything is happening simultaneously and there's really nothing to like notice in particular because it's all happening all at once. But the magician is our concentration, right? Our ability to focus on something. So what do we want to focus on? And that's our intent. So the magician has this sort of strange, so here's another beautiful thing. In our, and one of the traditional titles of the magician was the juggler.
Oh, wow.
And in our tarot card, actually, just sort of show this to the universe is that he's actually juggling. He's juggling all of these magical instruments. You know, you can see he's throwing them up, and they're all circling around him, and he's very adept at, you know, handling whatever it's coming down towards his hands. He's doing it. And I also have a certain sense that he's actually not touching anything. He's just kind of going like this, and everything's starting to rotate around him, and you know, he's become the center in which everything starts to revolve. But you know, you want to, like, if you have a beautiful piece of art or a beautiful object or a beautiful person in front of you, you want to pay attention to that person, the details of that person, the details of that being. You don't want to get distracted by everything. You want to focus in to that. In yoga, we talk about the bindu, that point of focus where, you know, everything gets eliminated except your focus on that one point, which also is very much a part of the magic, so the magician's consciousness, that frequency of consciousness. But one might say, or one might think, okay, so the magician is about this one pointed focus, and yoga, they talk about this a lot, you know, just choose one thing, and really, you know, whatever you choose, there's many good choices about what you can meditate on, but whatever it is, just stay with that thing. You know, stay with that thing, and your concentration will deepen and deepen and deepen, and you'll start to, all the secrets of being will be revealed to you by just continuing to concentrate on that one thing. That's really what is meant by the Rishi Patanjali when he talks about samadhi. It's that focus on one thing that begins to reveal the depth and the beingness and the cosmic qualities of any point of the universe in which you attempt to focus on, which you're successful in focusing on. But in this state of the Tantric Tarot, in this direction of this frequency of love of the Tantric Tarot, what we're talking about is the ability to focus, but it's not necessarily on one thing. You can focus on one thing and your whole, that's why we call it magic, right? You can focus on one thing and it magically transforms your perception, you know, like magic, you know, it's actually just really a, you know, a scientific thing. Whatever you know, if you look at the blanket, you see the blanket. There's not anything particularly magic about that. And if you look at the bookshelf, you see the bookshelf. But the consciousness of the magician is that sense that there's an infinite depth to whatever object you look at. You're looking at the microcosm of the macrocosm. So the blanket is just a microcosm of the entire cosmos. And if you really got to know that blanket, you would know the entire cosmos. And not only would you know the entire cosmos, but you know that everything in the cosmos is interacting with that blanket right now. It's in relationship.
Thinking about vibration 0 of the Fool or breath in the Shunya state, and then out of the Shunya state, then comes vibration 1, the magician intent as a bindu, as a single point that then has it has a combination of focus and completeness within it. But then, as the third step with it, then we go into the second trump, or the second vibration of intuition, of the space that is not in the bindu interacting with the bindu.
Yeah, beautiful. You know, so there's this great relationship between the magician and the high priestess, and they're actually really the primal lovers. Is the ability to focus and the ability to contain. And so what comes in with the idea of containing is that it contains everything. You know, and again, it's like that idea of the cosmos being contained in the microcosm, and you know, whatever you try to do it. So, you know, it's kind of like, if you could sort of think about it, if you were truly a poet, if you were truly a great lover, if you truly loved the goddess, you would maybe fall in love with a muse, with a woman, or any love object, a man, a man who you were in love with, a man who you saw the energy of that containing the cosmos within their being. And so it starts out, it's a person, right? Like there's many great love stories in the world. So it starts out with a person, and, as people we have, lots of limitations and lots of idiosyncrasies that, we have that nobody else has in exactly the way we have them. And so, you sort of like, well, like, this isn't very much about the cosmos. This is getting, to learn about Jane or Betty or John or whoever it is that you decided to become into relationship with. But if you're truly a poet, or you're truly a lover, or you're truly a cosmic lover, then you begin to explore the microcosm of that being that you've decided to love with. And we tend to choose, at least my feeling about this, my poetic feeling about it, is that the beings that we tend to fall in love with are the beings who we see that entrance into a greater reality. It's like being in love is this experience of, there's so many more possibilities opening me now that I'm in the presence of my beloved than before that. And that, so the priestess sort of becomes your altar, right? Just like, you have, a picture of Ganesha, a statue of Ganesha, or a picture of your favorite guru on your altar, and you bow to that and you meditate it. In India, they would have like just a stone, right, as representing Shiva. It wasn't even a statue of Shiva. It was just like this phallic shaped stone. And but by truly imagining into the possibilities of what that being before you represents, whether it's a stone or a person or a picture, or all of your memories of all the things that you've experienced in relationship to those images, it becomes this gateway to a much larger universe. And that's what I feel like the great story is about. For me, it's always a story of a love relationship, just because of my predilections of a for me, it's like the romantic poets, a relationship between a man who's the poet and a woman who's the poet's muse. And the woman becomes the muse. She inspires the poet to imagine all the depths and the beauty and the vitality and the mystery and the dance and the motions of his entire reality. And he sees that in the beauty of his beloved. So that's what and whoever the priestess is for you, or if we're just, relating to the Tantric Tarot and it's just the card, the High Priestess, there's this aspect of the beloved that now contains everything. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about in terms of the intuition was this myth of Ariadne. So the story of Ariadne is that she was the lover of Theseus, who was the great Athenian hero in ancient times in Greece. And he had to travel to Crete, where Ariadne was a priestess. And came from a very different tradition. She came from the Minoan tradition, which was not an Olympian tradition, whereas Theseus's patron god was Poseidon, one of the Olympians. He was sort of more of the patriarchal sort of version of Greek religion, whereas the Cretan religion was more of the goddess-oriented religion. And Ariadne was considered to be the goddess on the earth. She was a priestess, but she was not considered to be a mortal being. She was actually, while she lived as a mortal being, she was actually the embodiment of the goddess. And they fell in love with each other, and it was sort of surprising for both of them. I mean, for Theseus, that he would fall in love with somebody from such a foreign religious tradition. And for her, being the goddess on earth, that, the sort of mortal type of person, that she would fall so deeply in love with him, that she was really swept off her feet by the power of the attraction that they had for each other. And Theseus's task was to go into the labyrinth, which is a symbol for the entire cosmos, the sort of the confusing twists and turns of everything that's offered to us in our lives. And what usually happened to people when they went into the labyrinth was at a certain point, unbeknownst to them, they'd go down the wrong passage and come into the chamber of the Minotaur, which was a bull-headed man who was supernaturally strong and would basically devour the person who came into contact with him. And Theseus was an incredibly strong man, gifted by the graces of Poseidon, gifted by the graces of Hercules, who had, was the strongest man on the earth at the time. And he felt like when he met the Minotaur, he would be able to defeat him. And he was right, he was able to do that. But the labyrinth had defeated, was one thing to defeat the Minotaur, but the labyrinth had defeated every person who had ever gone into it before, because nobody who had entered into the labyrinth had ever been able to find their way out of it, because there were such complicated twists and turns to it, and it was so craftily made that it would sort of turn you back inwards no matter how far you tried to get out of it. So Ariadne's ingenious idea was to have a silver thread on a spool, which Theseus would hold as he wandered in through the labyrinth and all of its maze-like twists and turns. And so that when he had completed his task, he would nearly wind the thread back up and it would lead her back to his beloved. So it's this beautiful image of not only sort of being guided, but guided back to your beloved, guided back to the being that you love the most, the being that opens up your heart. And this is really what a muse is. This is what a muse is for a poet, is that sort of magnetic north that keeps drawing him to unfurl all the mysteries of the universe.
On that subject, it seems like this is also the point in which there is some duality that gets entered in. And so a lot of the way that we've approached this so far has looked at the idea of basic, and to sort of overlay sort of a particular model on it, like a male poet and a female muse. Can you talk a little bit about the feminine experience of the High Priestess and why it's important that she's female in this method?
Yeah. So, to sort of put it in a very philosophical way, or maybe a little more technical way, I think what we're really talking about is the difference between mind and heart. So, traditionally, and I mean, certainly every individual is different, and this is just Blake would say that we become what we behold. So throughout human history, there's been this myth of the man and the woman and who they are and what they represent. And that's been developed through story upon story upon story, changed in various ways, but it's been a persistent myth in our culture. And so in that myth, the man more tends to represent the mental ability, and the woman represents the emotional ability, the ability to feel versus the ability to think. And so in the tarot, when we talk about the High Priestess, we talk about that ability to feel. It's not like you have to be a woman to have that ability to feel. And in fact, the High Priestess wouldn't do anything for you if you didn't have the ability to feel.
Yeah, a key wounding of patriarchy for everybody is the idea that feeling is it's a sole domain of women, and that they're the experts on it in a way that men aren't, for example.
But that's part of like the beauty of the romance of the mind and the heart, or the man and the woman, and the traditional sort of fables and myths, is that the man sort of is a little bit handicapped, heart-wise, and the woman is a little bit handicapped strategy-wise, skill-wise, mental-wise. And, you know, again, you know, you are free to make up whatever myth you want, you know, and reverse the roles, or, you know, the tall woman and the short woman, or, you know, whatever you want to do, you know. And, you know, because myth is just what you create. You know, the myth is the creation of the poet. So, but the priestess is that faculty within ourselves of feeling, of love, right? Of, you know, feeling love as an attractive force, as a magnetic force. So that's that guiding force of the thread, right? You know, your heart senses this invisible thread that takes you where you're supposed to go. You know, what is the biggest thing that brings us happiness in our life? To embrace our beloved. But oftentimes we feel separated from our beloved. So what draws us to our beloved? It's not the mind. The mind can't do it. It's the heart. And so the priestess represents that sense of the magician can create anything. He's got infinite possibilities. He can come up with ingenious things that have never people have seen before or experienced before. You can come up with a song that inspires people in a way that no other. One of the things I love about music is, you know, everybody, the guitar is the same guitar, but a different guitarist makes a completely different thing out of that guitar. And when you have an artist, he creates something that you can listen over and over and again. And your experience of that piece of music is unique to what he or she created with their guitar. And so the magician can do that. He can create all of these different things, and they're beautiful and they're fascinating. But it's the thing that we love that leads us towards fulfillment, that leads us to happiness, that leads us to, in the Tantra we would say, to the evolvement of our soul, to the development of our soul. And that's the priestess art. That's the art of the woman or the goddess, or that's their specialty in this myth, is that she, you know, and when we look about this, you know, okay, let's look at the relative strengths of men and women that we talk about, and you can see this played over and over again in the media. And one of the things we talk about women is that they're just so great at dealing with the chaos of everything, right? You know, a woman is like the master multitasker. She can feed the baby and do stuff on the computer, and she can be aware of what's going on in the kitchen, and somebody can come in who's, you know, was an unexpected guest, can arrive in the house. And I see this with Hardev and my partner, you know, like I'm like doing my thing, and if somebody new comes in, I'm kind of like, you know, Jesus, you know, you're distracting me from my thing. I really wanted to work on doing my writing right now. I can't really visit with a guest right now, and I have to really make an effort to shift my consciousness, to change the fact that there's a whole new situation going on. But women seem to be much more fluid with that, have much more of a fluid ability to go like, okay, there's a new person here, and we're going to include them in the whole, you know, that's why we call them priestesses, right, is that they create this group experience. They're very good at creating a group experience and really good at including people. And so, you know, the priestess is that ability to like not just focus on one thing and not just create one thing, but to include it in this greater and greater cosmos. And the priestess art is to do that with love. You know, it's one thing to, you know, you can be in a group of people and it can be a miserable experience. And you can be in a group of people and it can be a wonderful experience. And I would argue that the difference there is love. That, you know, if people can come into a group in that vibration and that frequency of love, then every element of the group becomes meaningful to them.